So, welcome back, folks. Thank you for joining us, and hopefully, some more people will be coming online shortly. And I know the video is accessed by a variety of people. So, anyway, we're here, and as some wise person once said, the people who need to be here are here. So we're good. Um, Thank you once again to Susan for finding time in an increasingly hectic schedule to be with us and gift us with her experience and learning and interest in the topic of caring in community. So, if you would please join me in prayer. We thank you, gracious God, for these days of early fall. We thank you for the things that you teach us day by day of love and grace and community. And as we look to this subject this evening, we ask that you bless us with open hearts and minds and help us to grow in love as we advance in our knowledge. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
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 So, Susan, it's all yours.
Well, so it's good to be back with you tonight. We seem to be fewer than we were last time around. I hope that's not a reflection on 2 weeks ago, but whatever. Um, it is what it is. And in the first incarnation of this program, the second week was really designed to be very much an interactive, you ask me questions, I respond. We have a kind of a fulsome conversation around the topic. When we ended 2 weeks ago, I asked you if there were areas that you would like us to explore a little bit more. And what was named as we left was the area of palliative care and medical assistance in dying. So those were two things that were named as possible conversation topics for us tonight. And the invitation was given to let Ross know if there were any other things that you wanted to explore. I'm going to guess nobody reached out to him because Ross didn't reach out to me. So, so I think that's probably where we'll go. But before we go there, for those of you who were present 2 weeks ago, and Shirley, I'm not sure if were you with us 2 weeks ago?
I planned to be and I wasn't able to be, but
Okay.
I've watched the video and quite enjoyed it, and I'm glad to
Oh,
be here
oh,
tonight. Yes.
okay. Well, good to have you here. I'm not always good at remembering everybody who was online with us, but I didn't quite recall you. So, I'm wondering if there's anything from 2 weeks ago that you wanted to pick up on, because we had, a pretty general conversation around pastoral care as a critical aspect of discipleship, as a way of being in relationship with other people, modeled after Jesus, who lived that life of caring and comforting and being a healing presence, of meeting people where they were and responding to their needs. So, last time around we talked a bit about loneliness. And loneliness, folks, is an epidemic in our culture. It really is. It's surprising in a world that is so peoply, how many people feel isolated and alone. And so we talked a little bit 2 weeks ago about how our role, how our discipleship gets lived out by reminding people that they are not alone. And we do that in lots of different ways. So, do you have any questions, any comments you want to raise from 2 weeks ago? Nope.
Uh,
Okay.
Susan,
Yes.
in the readings that you gave, I
Yep.
went through them, and I just wanted to comment on in the first chapter that you provided us with the primary and pastoral care.
Hmm.
Near the beginning of it, was uh, this story about a student minister who attended the the death or the surpassing of the family gathering after somebody important had died in the family, and all they did was sit there quietly, say a word, and then having one of the main members of the family come up and thank them for what they had done the previous day or night. And that story really struck me. It just, you know, the power of quiet presence.
Yep, absolutely. And we did talk a little bit about that 2 weeks ago, but it really is amazing what that power of presence is. It is not about what we say, it's not about words, it's about so often it's about just being present with someone. And I think I probably confessed to all of you 2 weeks ago that that was one of my biggest learnings in pastoral care was learning when to just be quiet. And for those of us who are extroverted, that can be a really difficult task because we are compelled almost to fill space with words. My introverted colleagues do not have the same problem. They can sit quite comfortably in silence and recognize that. They may struggle more when it comes to needing to come up with words. So it really is a balance. And you know, Michael, that's probably a really good kind of invitation into a little bit of a focused conversation around palliative care and what a privilege it is to walk with people in that space. So I'm wondering, just so that I have a better sense of you, what's your personal experience in being present with people in a palliative care situation? Any of you want to talk a little bit about that, just so I know sort of where you're coming from?
My mother spent the last 3 months of her life in hospital, and I slept in the room with her every night while she was passing.
Okay.
We, as a dinner theater group, actually performed a song at her funeral, but because she told us we had to. And before we did so, we recorded it and took it to her in the hospital so she could say whether or not we were good enough to perform.
And were you?
Yes, we were. She was
Okay.
very pleased. You'd have to know
Excellent.
my mother, but yeah, she was a presence.
Okay, thank you.
I don't actually have any experience in a palliative environment, but my father, when he passed away from Alzheimer's, he passed away in the nursing home,
Hmm.
and so it was kind of a palliative environment. You know, we family members were taking turns sitting with him, you know, for
Hmm.
the final few days and that kind of thing. But
Okay.
it's kind of the limit of my direct experience with that kind of vigil.
Okay. Yeah.
And I don't have any experience with a vigil. I happened to be home for my dad's birthday the year he passed away, just after
Hmm.
his birthday.
Okay.
So we weren't actually expecting him to pass, but we
Right.
happened there right after it happened and did the CPR thing and called the ambulance, and of course he didn't
Okay.
revive. But he had,
Right.
he had waited until both families that were away had made it there to visit
Hmm.
for his birthday, and then not all of us were there at the time, but it was like he'd waited.
Yeah, and people have that capacity. They truly do. So palliative care, just so that we're clear, palliative care is not just about dying or those final days as somebody's leading into their dying process. Palliative care is really about how one lives with a terminal diagnosis. And so it is really far more about how one lives than about how one dies. And it really is, it's a privilege to be able to walk with people in that process. And it's a privilege to be invited into that sacred space and to walk closely with folks. So from a personal experience, and Gail is well aware of my personal experience around palliative care. I have walked with many, many, many people from the time of a critical diagnosis through into their death. That's one of the, for me, one of the true blessings of being in pastoral ministry. But it's 5 years ago that it became upfront and personal for me. So 5 years ago, on the 1st of August, my husband Paul was diagnosed with liver cancer and he died 7 weeks later. And so we had a 7 week process from a man who was well, seemingly well, with, a few aches and pains and a few complaints, but absolutely no idea at all that he was dying with liver cancer through until his death. And in what in many ways felt like a whirlwind. Um, we went from death being something that was a long way in the future, we hoped, to something that was upfront and personal. And so I can tell you that it is a very different experience to walk that experience personally rather than professionally. And I learned a great deal about what's important in palliative care. We were incredibly blessed with a circle of friends and family who were able to be supportive of us. Paul was very clear that he wanted to die at home. And we as a family were very clear that we wanted that to happen. As you'll recall, 5 years ago, we were still dealing with COVID. We were dealing with hospital restrictions, which made it really difficult for family to be present. And so we really wanted him to be able to come and be at home. And that happened, and I'm really deeply grateful. But I learned a number of things in that experience. I learned the value of just the kindness of others and the many, many ways that that was expressed. How often have you wondered, what can I do? Right? Has that been a common, like, oh my goodness, my friend has just been diagnosed with cancer. What can I do? And it is that question of what can I do when I really can't do anything to fix it or make it better? And most of us are compelled to want to do that. One of the first gifts that arrived came not for Paul, it came for me. And so I would remind you that when you're thinking about how to care for folk in community, it's not just about caring for the person who is dying, although that's important. It's also about caring for the caregiver. So, one of the things that I recall that was so helpful was not only did people say, "How's Paul?" Um, and, kind of just sometimes wanted to say, well, for a man who's dying, he's okay. Because we were kind of flippant in that way. But the people who were intentional about asking how I was in the midst of all of that. The first gift that arrived from a group of my clergy colleagues, and it was a basket of all things yellow. And it came, actually, I can show you. I still have the bright yellow waste paper basket that everything that was in this gift came in. I think it was my friend Catherine McDonald who probably had a lot of fun shopping at the dollar store and in other places looking for all things yellow. And it came with a card that simply said, we know that in essence, and I don't remember it exactly, but in essence, we know we can't fix this, but yellow is the color of sunshine, and we want to brighten your day. And so in my yellow basket, there were two bottles actually of yellowtail wine because they both knew that I drinked, and yellowtail wine was just fine. There were yellow pens. There was a bright yellow balloon. There was a yellow squeegee stress ball. There were just a whole variety of bright yellow things, but it was the sentiment of we can't fix this, but we can brighten your day. And that was so very helpful for me. Other things that were helpful were, the people who just showed up and mowed the lawn. They didn't ask, they just came and did it because, frankly, mowing the lawn, that was a Paul job. That was not a my job. And so somebody who actually didn't ask, they didn't say, look, if there's anything I can do to help, just ask. Because for most people who are in the midst of a palliative care situation, they don't have the capacity to even think about what it is they need. They are on autopilot. So if you're trying to figure out how can I help in this particular situation, think about what, you might find helpful. Take a look around, see what you can do. I had a friend who came and stayed with Paul in the later stages of his dying because I didn't feel comfortable going out and leaving him alone, even though, he was sleeping quite a lot at that point. And so a friend who Paul knew well, came and stayed. And while I was out, do you know what she did? She cleaned my fridge. Paul was sleeping, and she physically cleaned my fridge. Not that my fridge was particularly grimy, but it used it, right? And it was just such a symbolic act of caring. Other gifts that came in the midst of this process, um, were gift cards for food, right? And food. Lots of food came to my house. Sometimes almost an overwhelming amount of food. And so thank goodness for a freezer. But I think many of us are conditioned to show our care for others through food. So food is great. A gift card for food is also really nice because then you can just order something in, and away it came. So, we were very fortunate. There were some very practical things that our friends were able to provide us with. One friend who, when she heard of Paul's diagnosis, reached out and said that she had something for the shower so that Paul could sit in the shower and have a shower rather than, trying to navigate standing because that became really difficult. Another friend, actually, Paul's sister-in-law, or Paul's sister, my sister-in-law, had an electric bed. And so, it was nicer than a hospital bed because it was a double bed. And she made arrangements to have that electric double bed moved to our house. And that was one of the greatest gifts because it was big enough that we could both lay in it together. And as those days became longer and his comfort level was more, well, he was less comfortable, it was nice to be able to have that space. It was an incredible gift to us. Um, we had friends who, just rotated through to come and provide a little bit of respite. And in so doing, to be able to have lovely conversations. And Paul, not everybody faces death with sort of a positive attitude. Some people really rail against that. Paul was able to look at his dying as something that was unfolding, and he was a funny character. But he looked upon it in some ways as an adventure. The most difficult aspect was looking at our grandchildren and recognizing that he would not see them grow up. That was the most painful part of the process. But we were blessed with supportive folk who offered us what they could. And I want to make sure that you all know that palliative care in Nova Scotia is frankly amazing. I had no prior sort of understanding of that on a personal level. We had the most amazing palliative care nurse. Her name was Shannon. She came to the house after Paul was released from hospital. She provided us with all of the information that we could possibly require. There are systems in Nova Scotia in place where you can register so that if you have somebody who is palliative and they're registered in this program, and say, for example, you are helping somebody get out of bed to go to the bathroom at night and they fall and you can't get them up, you can call 911 and the paramedics will come and they will help you get that person back into bed with no expectation that they are going to hospital, with none of that. There's a whole amazing system in place that provides you with substantive help on the home front if that's what you want. We had 24-hour a day access to the palliative care department at the hospital. We had VONs who, initially they thought they would come once a week. Well, Paul's illness progressed very quickly to the point that we went from once a week to 3 times a week to daily. And like they were just there. And it all comes without a bill. Like there is no financial impact on that, which was really absolutely amazing. Um, so, one of the things that sort of came out of that for me was just the recognition of how important it is to have open and honest conversations with people when they end up in that particular situation. So, um, having conversations with people about death and what to do when a person dies are all really, really important. And, we were just really fortunate to be able to walk that road with people surrounding us and being present with us. So when and it's hard for me. So it was 5 years on um, Friday. Paul died the day after his 64th birthday. So his birthday was this past Thursday, and the fifth anniversary of his death was Friday. And it's hard to believe in many ways that it's been 5 years, but it has. And so, again, I don't know what your experience is with that, but I can tell you that um, it is an honor and a privilege to be invited into that sacred space when people are dying. There's a lovely book. You can tell I'm, professors, teachers, clergy, we always have books, right? So this is a book called May I Walk You Home? Because I think that's a lovely image, right? That we are companioning somebody when we are invited to be present with them in a palliative care process. We are walking them home when we think about that next phase. So it's May I Walk You Home? And the stories are by a palliative care nurse, Joyce Hutchison, Hutchison. And the prayers are by Joyce Rupp, who is a lovely Roman Catholic writer who just writes beautiful things. Um, in the foreword to the book, Joyce Hutchinson writes these words. Being with the dying is one of the most intimate experiences on this earth. It is very much like being in the delivery room as a baby is being born, and we all know what a miracle that is. Being at the other end of a person's life as he or she is preparing to be born into eternal life is as great a miracle. I often had felt that this dear dying person that I am with is in the palms of my two hands, and I am, through my caregiving, just handing him or her back to God. I refer to caregivers of the dying as being midwives of the dying. It is the most spiritual of experiences. The love and the presence of God at the bedside as a person is taking those last few breaths is life-giving to me. One of the greatest gifts, she continues to write, I have received from my dying patients is a wonderful insight into what heaven, life hereafter, eternal life, or life after death might be like. I have been committed to walking beside dying persons with whatever belief system they had, and in doing that, I have been enriched spiritually by their very beliefs. For some, their idea of heaven has been a campfire surrounded by folks who love each other, a flower-filled space with a baby, a journey with loved ones coming to meet them, or a journey of flying with the birds and feeling as free as can be. Would I have had this rich view of what new life after death might be without having shared their journeys? I think not. I am extremely grateful to each and every one with whom I have journeyed. They have helped me look forward to what is waiting for me when I complete my own journey on this earth.
Thank you, Susan. A couple of things came to mind while you were talking. One is the uh, something I heard about in the past few years are birth doulas and death doulas,
Mm-hmm.
and the whole practice of sort of welcoming somebody in and sort of helping them out the door, so to speak.
Yep.
The other thing that came to mind when you were talking about food and meals is
Mm-hmm.
there's a website called mealtrain.com,
Mm-hmm.
and it is a site that allows groups of people to schedule meals or to buy gift cards for people who are illnesses or supporting somebody after they've given birth or other life events.
Yeah.
And I know when my niece had breast cancer, her friends set up a meal train for her and her family. And
Yeah.
the people that live close were scheduling themselves in and say, I'll bring over, such and such on Wednesday, I think, which was a
Yeah.
lovely concept because then you don't end up with a freezer full of food.
It is actually. And I mean, we know church communities are phenomenal for that sort of support. And so to be able to use that kind of app to schedule it really is, yeah, it's incredibly important. And you're right, Michael, like there is in this spiritual but not religious world that we seem to live in, there are people who are becoming death doulas. I really, I'm not sure what I think about it, to be perfectly honest, except that if it helps people to find their sort of comfort and their peace in that presence, and they have not been connected to a church community, then it makes sense. But I think it is part of that spiritual but not religious phenomena, right? People know that they want some kind of spiritual support at this time in their lives, and yet they are not necessarily looking to the Christian church for that support. And in some ways, that's kind of sad. However, I think, it's important for us who are part of the church to understand that we have a role to play within our own families, our own church communities, our own neighborhoods, and knowing how to respond when, we hear of these situations, right? I mean, it's one thing when somebody, sort of drops dead of a massive heart attack and we respond with, sympathy and condolences and that sort of thing. It's another very different experience when we discover that a friend, a neighbor, a church member, a family member has just been diagnosed with, pancreatic cancer. What does that look like? We know that that's not good. We know that that's likely to be a longer drawn out journey. It's likely to be a journey that's going to may well include chemotherapy, radiation, surgery, lots and lots of medical appointments. My personal situation with Paul was such that there were no options for additional treatment. I guess maybe if it had been diagnosed a year before, we might have gone through a year of chemotherapy and goodness knows what else. I don't know that it would have changed the outcome in the end. Um, and so, we just look at that. One of the other things I would say that um, I I guess I knew before I was dealing with it personally, but honesty is really important when you are accompanying somebody through a palliative care situation. So it's really, really important that we meet people where they are and not try and make things better, i.e., fix it or deny the reality of what's happening. So, I was thinking about this and what kind of conversation we might have, and thinking about the role of hope, right? We all have hope, but what does that hope look like when you are in a palliative care situation? And how do you speak about hope when someone is dying? And, what does that really look like? And so again, because I go to books and I read and I look at what people significantly smarter than me have written. And in a book called The Anatomy of Hope, um, Dr. Jerome Groopman writes these words: Hope acknowledges the significant obstacles and deep pitfalls along the way. Hope has no room for delusions. And I thought that was an interesting line. Hope has no room for delusions. Because how often is our sort of go-to response when we are working or talking with somebody who's just had a really horrible diagnosis? How often do we want to try and tell them that it'll be better? Not to worry, it'll be fine. You'll be great. You look wonderful. And yet, that's often what one might call kind of a distortion of reality or magical thinking or some kind of distorted understanding of the circumstances. And so I am not saying that we don't have hope. We have lots of hope, but hope changes in accordance with the circumstances that we're in. So, absolutely, when Paul was first diagnosed, and they said he had lesions on his liver, we hoped that there might be something that could be done. When we discovered that that was not the case, then, we hoped that he would be able to come home. And we were able to make that happen. Then hope was around being able to manage pain. And we were able to live into that hope. And so hope changes, but our hope was never that he was somehow going to get better once we had had the conversation with the oncologist. And so, you know, um, those kinds of things change constantly. And it is not at all helpful if people aren't willing to accept that. And what I've come to discover is that most people who are dying know that they're dying, even when their family aren't telling them, right? Oh, we can't possibly tell mom that this is what's happening. I'm going to guess that most often people are aware, but there is a culture of silence and secrecy that really gets in the way of good pastoral care and really profound moments. And so, I know that for me in ministry, one of the really, I think, important roles that I had to play was to help people to be honest, to risk having those hard conversations, hard, teary, emotional, nothing easy about it conversations. And yet, once everybody is on the same page, there is a beautiful opportunity for far better conversations to happen, for conversations about what do you want to have happen when you die and we celebrate your life. So, those things are really, really important. And having realistic hopes, um, and making sure that the person who is dying still feels like they have some control and some agency in their own lives is also really important, because when you are in a palliative care situation, you are so often at the mercy of so many other people who are dictating your life through pain management schedules and appointments and all of those sorts of things. And people feel like they are losing so much control. And so to be able to engage in honest conversations about what's important. One of the most, I think, meaningful things that Paul and I did. And again, I mean, he could be a pain in the ass, but he was a pretty amazing man. And nobody in this world will ever love me like he did. So I have to be clear about that. But one of the commitments that we made was that we were going to find joy in every day. We were going to be intentional. And it was an absolutely intentional action to say, we are going to live every day as much as we can. So palliative care focuses on living, not on dying. We are going to live every day as fully as we can, and we are going to name joy when we see it. And we are going to look for it, like not just willy-nilly, we are going to look for joy. And that perspective was incredibly helpful. And I think that's something that we can all do when we're accompanying people. We can help identify and name the moments of joy. And that's not to dismiss the pain or the anguish or the grief, but it is to say that life is still good, right? even in dying, life is good. And that's pretty biblical and pretty scriptural. Um, and so, just to think about that. So, thoughts, I feel like I'm talking a lot, Jerry.
Um, I had the pleasure of being trained to a certain degree with Capital Health, and for a number of years was a palliative care visitor, and,
Mm-hmm.
and would be called upon from time to time. People who didn't have a lot of family,
Mm-hmm.
maybe people who had a lot of family, but there's this blessing of unfamiliarity
Mm-hmm.
where when you're with someone in those final days and weeks and having in some cases traveled with them for, I followed some clients for as long as a year or more
Mm-hmm.
and others for short periods of time, but they are prepared to say to a stranger things they would never say to family,
Mm-hmm.
friends, or even professionals. And to be able to be in that space where you could be that listening ear.
Mm-hmm.
In some cases, you could be that advocate. They would say or share something with you that sometimes they were very specific. They wanted you to share with staff at the hospital, or they wanted you to share with family.
Mm-hmm.
Other times they didn't want it shared, but they wanted it to be said
Right.
and heard, and to be able to be that ear. Sometimes we think in pastoral care or any visitation that, oh, I don't know so and so, and I'm really not sure what I could bring to a visit.
Mm-hmm.
And that gift of unfamiliarity can bring some pretty amazing experiences, at least in the short time I did that work. So that's something to keep in mind.
Thanks, Jerry. Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. Anybody else have experiences that they be? Gail, there you go.
As you know, my oldest brother, my mother, and my best friend all died within 6 months of each other,
Mm-hmm.
within a 6 month period. And I was blessed to be with them in their last hours. But palliative care for me was the day mom went into the nursing home, and to make sure that we were there, somebody was there all the time so that she would know that she wasn't alone and whatever. And, we were always truthful, okay? And we laughed together and we cried together and we talked about things that normally maybe we would never have talked about.
Mm,
But all of that left me with a sense of peace. That's not to say it didn't hurt when they passed away, because it certainly did. Okay.
right.
But it was one of the most beautiful things that I had ever done. I was with my dad, as you know, when he passed away, and they were so peaceful. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Like they were just so peaceful. And I think that's one of the great blessings in my life, that I was able to share that with them.
Mm-hmm.
Others went home, but I wasn't leaving them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, for sure. It's an amazing honor to be in those places. But as somebody was saying earlier, um, sometimes people have a capacity, to wait it out. So I know lots of people who, don't want people around when they die. And so I've had more than one conversation with a family member who was just racked with guilt because in the 15 minutes that they went away to the cafeteria to grab a sandwich and coffee because they hadn't eaten in hours, it was in those, 15 minutes that mom died. And people can feel incredibly guilty around that. Um, in my case, Paul had said consistently that he didn't want me there when he died. It kind of made me mad, but he would say that, Snooky, you shouldn't be here when I die. I don't want you to see that. And I would go, well, honey, I love you. I'll be there. Well, he had a mind of his own. The day that he died, we needed to go to the pharmacy to pick up more pain meds. Paul's sister was with him. She had been with him all night. I gave him a kiss, told him I loved him, said I was going to Moffat's to pick up more pain meds. His sister said, I'm going to get him sort of cleaned up and tidied up. And I went, she did that. She said to him, Paul, if you want to die when Susan's not here, now is the time. And he did. And my sister was really mad that he died when I wasn't there, when I had been there for 7 weeks. And I went, he said for whatever reason, he didn't want me there. And it wasn't out of lack of love, it was out of deep love. And so that's what happened. And, people, I think, sometimes have that agency. And for goodness sake, don't ever beat yourself up over that. Like, if you have been present with someone, if you have made sure they know that they are loved, if you have said all the words that you need to say, there is no reason to just beat yourself up around not being there at that last breath.
You
That
know,
was my experience.
I know when I was with Dad, I was sitting beside the bed, and he was kind of fidgety, and I said to him, Dad, would you feel more comfortable if I went over to the other side of the room? And he said he would. And then within minutes, the nurse came in and said, he's gone, dear. I couldn't believe it was that fast, but it was. Now, Mom and my brother and my girlfriend, they were altogether different. They wanted you there, they wanted you holding their hand, and that was fine.
Yep,
But Dad didn't want me to see him pass away.
right. Yep. And we owe it to people to give them that kind of decision-making power as much as we are able. Um, so yeah, thanks for sharing that, Gail. Other comments, other experiences you've had, Ross?
I think it's really important before we enter into something like this that we get our own thoughts about death and dying straight in our heads.
Mhm.
This is not the place to be working out our own fears or misgivings or theological nonsense or whatever. Um, it's just not. So if we're going to enter into this and all that has been said is true, we need to do the prior work of being sure that we can be as present as possible. And that may involve acknowledging our experience. It um, may mean making sure that we've done the grieving that we need to do about a previous event. And uh, I often say to our students that when you're leading a funeral, that's not the time when you do your grieving. You have another role. And in a similar fashion, it's just to be aware of whether or not this is something that we can do, because not all of us can do everything, which is perhaps why God puts us in church so that some of us can do some things and others can do other things. And
Mhm.
if you can't, it's okay.
Mhm.
But if you can't, then don't, or find ways that don't involve you as deeply. Because you can make what you hope to have be better. You can make it incredibly worse. And the business around not knowing what to say. There's actually a book out there somewhere entitled "I Don't Know What to Say."
Mhm.
And the conclusion is it's okay not to say. Because often, if we don't know what to say and we force ourselves to say, then we end up saying things that are not particularly helpful. So,
Yeah, and often, you're going if you're with people in these situations, you're going to get questions to which there are no answers. You are going to get the why questions. Why me? Right? I mean, it's a classic kind of question. It's a natural question. There is no answer really to that question, why me? There are also going to be, theological questions that you may get asked, like, how could God do this to me? Right? That's a pretty hard statement, and it is born out of a theological worldview that God is in control of everything. So if a bad thing is happening to me, then God must be doing it. That's closely linked to the question around, is God punishing me? Right? What did I do to deserve this? Um, and or is this God's will, or it must be God's will, I don't understand it, right? And so I think it's really important, as Ross was saying, about kind of having done your own work in advance of some of these places, to know, how do you respond to those kind of questions? When somebody says, why me? Or how could God do this to me? How do you help somebody reframe that question? How do you respond, even if it's to say, don't know, right? Um, can you help somebody? Can you offer an alternative theological perspective? So, when somebody has said to me, how could God do this to me? One of my first sort of reactions is to help me understand the God that you think did this to you, or to be able to say, I don't believe that God is doing this to you. My congregation knows I've been known to say on more than one occasion, shit happens. And it does, right? Stuff happens in life. I personally do not believe that God is responsible for those things. And I am quite able to say to people that, for me, the God I believe in does not do those things to people. Now, if somebody chooses to believe that God does indeed do those things, that's their business, and it's not for me to change it. But I feel compelled to offer people a different vision and a different understanding of God. And that's a God that does not do bad things to people, but a God who stands with us when bad things happen, right? A God who constantly is working to bring good out of bad, resurrection out of death, new life out of dying places, right? That's the God that I know. That's the God that I serve. And so I think it's important for us to have our own kind of theological understanding in place, so that we can name that. We don't have to make other people believe that. There will be some people who will always believe that, everything happens for a reason, i.e., it's somehow ordained and God has decided that it should happen. I am of the author Kate Bowler, who has written a book about, with that very title, everything happens for a reason, and what is it? Other things I don't believe, or something to that effect. But there is a kind of Christian culture in the air that is very much born out of an evangelical fundamentalist perspective that says God is in charge of everything. And so if it happened, it must be God's will and it must be because God has a reason. I personally don't subscribe to that theological perspective. Um, but lots of people haven't even thought it through, right? And when life is good, it's easy to think that good things only happen to good people. And when something terrible happens, that they must have done something wrong. Um, and,
Susan,
yeah.
um, just, you know, that I'm, my instinct when somebody says, why me?
Mm-hmm.
And my instinctful answer is, why not?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know that that would be particularly helpful response when somebody is dealing with their own mortality or whatever. But I think that that's it might be better to say I don't know. but
Right.
uh,
I
but
think often, Michael, people will come to that themselves, like, well, why not me? What's so special about me that something like this wouldn't happen? Um, but yes, we have to be cautious about how we engage in those conversations. And more often than not, it's an invitation to the other person to keep talking. Tell me more about how you're feeling. Tell me more about where God is in this for you. And sometimes sitting in silence while people think about it is really important. Um, but you will hear some of those phrases, and in part of it too, I think, is a processing piece, right? Where somebody is the first day that they hear they've been diagnosed with a terminal illness is in an absolute state of shock. And of course, the question is, why me? What did I do? Why is this happening? What could I have done to stop it? It's all very human and very natural. And then there is a progression of sort of processing the information. And Jerry, as you were saying, sometimes having an advocate is really important, being that other listening ear and helping people to just work through the all of the emotions that are there. Like, it is really quite something. And I think, I mean, we could spend hours and hours talking about this sort of thing and also kind of bereavement care. What do we do after somebody dies? How do we support the family in that process? Because everybody else's life goes back to normal, right? There is an intensity of pastoral care and people and presence and food and all of that when somebody's dying and in the 4 or 5 days after, especially if there's preparation for some kind of service or acknowledgement. And then, family goes home, all of the intensity diminishes, and the people who are most impacted are then kind of left on their own to figure out the next steps. And it's really a blessing when not everybody forgets and people remember. So, if there's again kind of a something I can give you that is maybe a helpful thing to remember to do is to keep a date book of friends, family member, church members that remembers those dates when somebody died or when it was their birthday, so that on the first anniversary, you can remember that and make a phone call, send a text, send a note. On the second anniversary, you can go, hey, just thinking about you. Those things mean a great deal, and people forget because they go on with their lives. And I can tell you, on Friday, I had you know, a couple of messages from friends who just knew it was going to be a hard day and who took the time in the morning to just send a note. And one note, all it said was hugs. That's all. It was one word. Didn't need to say more, didn't need to go beyond that. But, and that was from not somebody that I would say was a really, really close friend, but somebody who was intentional that 5 years later they remembered and sent me a message on the 19th of September, right? Like that stuff means a great deal. And from like you are all connected to church communities. And so if you are part of a church community, part of a pastoral care team, to simply keep a running track of those dates and to be able to send a text to someone or a card, it means a tremendous amount, and it doesn't take a lot of work. It takes a little bit of organizing, but it's incredibly meaningful. Um, yeah.
I think it's important through funeral ministry as well to do that same thing. Okay, if we keep a list of the funerals that we have done, the receptions that we have done,
Hmm.
that means a lot to not only the people of our church, but the people outside our church as well.
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely.
And the other thing, okay, that I sometimes say to people, it depends on who they are, is that I say, God doesn't deny there's going to be suffering in the world. What he does do is tell you that he'll walk with you through it.
Hmm.
Because it's hard to know what to say, right?
Yep, for sure. For sure. And your role as pastoral care people or followers of Jesus, you are that sort of God with skin on, right? That's how God walks with us, is both internally in that sort of spiritual, prayerful way, but also externally in the people who show up. And the people who walk with us, and the people who send us texts, and the people who, pop in with Tim's coffee or mow your lawn. That's how, I mean, we believe in an embodied God. God is not just sort of out there in the distance. That's why Jesus was born, right? God is present with us. And, the Spirit continues to inspire us, and that spirit of peace, which is just amazing, that peace of Christ, which is not like the world's peace. It's very, very different. And, we are agents of that triune God. And that's what discipleship is about. How do we live it out? And this is one of the very concrete ways that we live it out. So flipping a little bit, although absolutely related, lots of people with terminal illness are now opting for medical assistance in dying. And that was the other topic that got mentioned 2 weeks ago. And so I'm wondering, kind of before we get into that, um, have any of you had experience with family or friends who have made that made made that decision for MAID? What's your personal experience?
I have had with several people.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Other folks?
I have 3 people.
Okay.
I've had some indirect experiences, but nothing, not somebody I knew personally.
Okay.
But just this morning, there was a really interesting interview on the radio where they were talking about somebody who is in the process of dementia, and they wanted to be able to have maid, but the requirement for them to be of sound mind or whatever at the time is a, you know, I think that the thing about it was that there's a concern that people will be forced to make the decision to accept MAID sooner than they might otherwise because they're afraid that the choice will be taken away from them.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it is an incredibly complex um, process. It's a very complex and sensitive issue, and it has lots of pastoral implications, but it has it intersects with medical ethics, with laws, with lots of deeply held spiritual beliefs. It involves healthcare providers and pastoral caregivers and supportive individuals. It is fraught with like lots of tension, especially if family members have very different opinions on the whole process. I've known families where they haven't told extended members of the family that MAID was the route that their loved one was going because they knew that it would be met with lots of resistance. And, different denominations have very different beliefs about whether MAID is ethical. What's interesting, in a kind of strange way, as I had been thinking about this topic for tonight, I was at Ocean View Manor, where my dad is a resident, and I lead worship there every couple of months. So I was doing a service there yesterday morning, and the service went well. It was 30 minutes, was great. As it wrapped up, I was speaking with different residents, and I came to this woman, and she said to me, she looked me straight in the eye. She said, "I need to talk to you." And I went, "Oh, sure, you can talk to me." And I sat down, and she looked at me and she held my hand and she said, "What do you think about MAID?" And I went, "Oh, okay. Well, this came kind of out of nowhere. Um, what do I think about MAID?" And I had no idea if she was, in favor of it, if she was opposed to it, if she was considering it for herself. Like, I had no idea where this question was coming from, but she felt compelled to ask it. And so I said to her, "Well, I think MAID is a very personal decision." And, one that everybody needs to make for themselves, and nobody should be forced into it. But, it is a personal decision that one needs to think deeply about. And then she said something about, um, do you think that God, it was like, and I wish I'd had a recording to actually know the question, but it was in essence, do you think that God will punish me if I opt for MAID? That was the essence of her question. And I reassured her that I did not think God would punish her in any way, and that if she made the choice for MAID, that God would be ready and able to welcome her into open arms. But it was like this intense question that was on this woman's mind. And, this is a woman that is in long-term care. I would say, based on my, conversation with her, she is very cognitively astute. And I don't know if she has a diagnosis of something that she recognizes that her health is going to diminish. But her, later comment was, I just don't think that anybody should have to be in pain or be tube fed or like, I don't want that for myself. And so it's like, but she had a deep spiritual question about whether or not Maid was somehow going to have God um, angry at her. Um, so it was a very interesting question, and I thought, oh, well, how interesting that that should emerge on Monday when Tuesday night we're going to talk a little bit more about those things. So. Um, she was clearly wrestling with the spiritual dimensions of Maid. And if any of you have, walked with friends or family members, maybe you've had some of those conversations as well, with people about what they believe and how they're impacted. And there are, I think what you were trying to get at, there are a lot of ethical dimensions around MAID. There is a real concern within the disability community that people will be made to feel like their lives don't have value, that their lives don't have worth. And so MAID becomes the exit ramp as opposed to support for good living in community. And I can certainly understand that that could be the case. I think it could be a very slippery slope in a lot of places, and yet I personally do believe that people have that right to make that decision, for themselves. Um, all right, Gail, see you. Um, yeah, I think it's a highly personal decision. I think it probably is, one that is really intense with family members, and I know it has caused lots of division in families. Where one person feels strongly in favor of MAID and another is absolutely opposed to it. And so how do we as caregivers walk that road? What is it that we have to offer? And
And I think, Susan, that this is again one of those places where we have to make a separation between the ongoing and really important debate and the fact that somebody we know has made a decision and we are providing pastoral care. That's
mhm,
not, and so we have to we have to be that both non-anxious and also non-judgmental presence. It's not my role with somebody, regardless of my feelings. If they've made a decision and I am providing some sort of pastoral accompaniment, it's not my role to be trying to talk them out of it or to be chastising them, or they
mhm,
have made a choice. And
yeah,
one of the things around pastoral care is that we accompany people from where they are to wherever they are going, and I'm going to be here. And
absolutely.
if you want to engage in all of those debates, a happy day. And they're important conversations and they're not easy conversations. But that's not the place to do it when you're with somebody who has made that choice and you've been invited to walk that journey with them. And again, it's a separation that sometimes the pastoral caregiver has to do something with their own anxiety, and that can be really tough.
Mhm,
Um, I sometimes think that those statements about God never, that God others always has a reason for whatever happens is is an expression of my own fear about the chaotic nature of life. And if
right.
I can figure out why God did whatever God's doing to you, then I can avoid it. And like it's about our fear. So again, it's the invitation to be with somebody, and it's tough.
It is. It is. And sometimes, we're invited into the conversation before people have made the decision, right? As they are really trying to explore the spiritual and the ethical dimensions of MAID. And sometimes, certainly as clergy, we're invited into that conversation in the way that I was, on Monday, to sort of offer a perspective. And yeah, I think we have to be sort of really careful about how we enter into that so as not to influence people from our own perspectives. So one of our relatively recent graduates, the Reverend April Hart, did her final grad project on MAID, and it was focused on the the pastoral care. It was focused on United Church of Canada ministers who were offering pastoral care to people going through MAID and the impact that that was having on them as pastoral caregivers. Because it's intense to walk with people, to support people, and especially if you hold a different perspective, like you may not be in favor of that. Bill?
Yeah, I hear you loud and clear because I've got a friend. She's not deciding to do assisted end of life, but she has she's had a number of health issues. She had cancer and then she got over it. Then she had a bladder problem as a result of the cancer, and she had her bladder taken out, and so she's been living with the bag, whatever. And
Hmm.
now there were signs of liver of the cancer coming back, and now she doesn't want to do any chemo. She doesn't want to have any IV treatment. She doesn't want anything else. You know, she's made it very clear she's ready to go,
Hmm.
and all she wants is to make sure that she's not in pain.
Right.
And for me, I'm a real health nut, and I just think, you could get over this, eat the right stuff, stay off of sugar, chew garlic and do these other things, and really kind of focus on how you can, live a better life. She doesn't want any of that.
Hmm.
She likes to have her mayonnaise on everything, like half a cup every meal. And and it just blows my mind. And so when I try and walk the way with her, we go to dinner. I just shut my mouth when she asks the waiter for
Hmm.
some mayonnaise, and then looks at the guy and says, "Is that all you're bringing? I want mayonnaise." And so it's a real. It breaks my heart when someone's made the decision, no matter
Right.
what. I'm going down the road. We're done.
And you're accompanying,
Yeah.
right? And so it can be very tough to accompany people when they're making choices that wouldn't be your choice. Um, And, one of the things that you said, Bill, was, she wants to make sure she doesn't want to do any more treatment. She wants to be pain-free. So, I mean, lots of folks who have an opposition to MAID believe that what is really required is very good palliative care, and that if we lived in a culture that had better palliative care, we would have fewer people opting for MAID. I don't know if that's the case. Again, I do know in my own situation that, with Paul's situation, it unfolded so quickly that he didn't ever really even have an opportunity to engage in that conversation about whether he would opt for medical assistance in dying. It just went very quickly. Other close friends that I've walked with have been approved for MAID. One can be approved for MAID long before one ever actually wants to enact it and without choosing a date or any of those sorts of things. This other friend that I'm thinking about really struggled with honest conversation with his oncologist and medical community to say to him, your body is deteriorating really quite quickly. And, unfortunately, he died without accessing the kind of palliative care support for pain management that he could have had if he had opted in earlier. And so he did not take MAID. He also really didn't access the supports that he could have had. And so ultimately ended up dying actually quite a painful and traumatic death in front of his wife that could have been avoided if he had been able to have more honest conversations about where things really were in his process. So um, but it's complicated, right? And every human being is complicated, and every family situation is different, and every person is different. And, some people are not prepared to face their own dying. They're just unable. And so, um, you know, they're not going to choose MAID because they think that they're going to beat it, whatever it is. But when you're invited into that conversation with people who are choosing MAID, if you are invited to be present when that happens, it is sacred and holy, or at least it can be. And I know many clergy who, have said that it is amongst, the holiest moments to be present with people, to make those choices of music and prayer and ritual and, whatever that ritual might be, if it's meaningful to the person and to their family. And to then, see somebody just die very, very peacefully as opposed to dying sometimes is not a peaceful process. Sometimes it's very uncomfortable for the people who are sitting vigil. So, yeah,
This is
thoughts? Yep.
So, when you said that there are some people who think that, uh, you know, good palliative care is a substitute for aid,
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking immediately about people with ALS
Mm-hmm.
who have opted for MAID because they know that their journey is to become trapped in a body that no longer functions.
Yep.
And that can be a slow and terminable death because they can survive that way for quite some time.
Yep.
And so I instinctively recoil at the thought that palliative care is as a panacea for MAID.
Yeah, I don't know that it's a panacea for MAID, Michael, but I know that there are situations where people, and I'm not thinking in particular about ALS, but there are certainly people who very much worry about pain management and that process. I think there's also a sense of people, where we live in a culture where people do not want to be vulnerable. And dying is a vulnerable situation, right? when we're dying and people need to look after us, when we lose the capacity to control our bowels and somebody has to clean that up, when we can no longer, shower ourselves and somebody has to do that. Like all of those are really difficult things for us as humans to allow to happen. And so I think we live in a culture that says if I can't do it for myself, I don't want it to happen. And so MAID becomes the off ramp to go, I'm going to take charge. And I'm not judging this ethically one way or the other. It's just that's part of the phenomena, as opposed to being able to say, I am okay with somebody else caring for me as long as I'm not in pain.
And that is exactly the reason why I pray every day that dementia is finally going to be allowed as one of those reasons for MAID, because I
Right.
don't want to be in the position my father is in and have
Mhm.
to watch him. I don't want anyone to have to carry for me that way. So
Right.
every day.
Right. Yeah, and I understand that. Like, I look at my own dad who is, never gained the ability to walk after he fell and broke a hip. It'll soon be 2 years. And, he is at Ocean View Manor. Somebody looks after pretty much, well, all of his sort of bodily care. And yet I know my dad would never ever choose MAID. Like even if he were able to do that, I know he wouldn't. Um, but I do wonder about that sometimes. I look at at that situation, and I am grateful for, people who offer the kind of care that they offer. I think about another man who was in my congregation in Cole Harbor who had an illness similar or disease similar to ALS and lived in long-term care for many years with somebody else looking after all of his needs. And he was absolutely committed to living every day fully as he possibly could. He had no desire to die. He wanted to spend time with his family. When I would go to visit, there was always something positive about his life. And I remember looking at his physical state of being and thinking, how can you find joy in the way that you do? So, it is such a personal decision about what life means to us in whatever capacity. And, I don't think any of us can make the choice for somebody else. And we really have to be careful about how we influence people's decision making around those things. But I do think that we have a role to play as pastoral caregivers in that process of MAID. I think that our pastoral concern for the living and the dying is incredibly important. I think providing space again for family members to talk about the experience is also really important because, you know, just like the woman at Ocean View asked me the question about what I thought God would think about MAID, there are family members who may hold very differing, theological perspectives. And so they may wholeheartedly believe that their loved one has just consigned themselves to hell for having chosen MAID, right? And so how do you open up that conversation to allow them to name those fears? Again, you don't have the answers. You can offer alternative perspective, but how do you offer the listening ear, the pastoral presence to let people name their deepest fears or their confusion or their anger? Like that's the other thing that often comes from with MAID, is that family members can be mad. that somebody has opted for that because they see it as somehow copping out, as not wanting to live longer and choosing that. And so to recognize that there's just such a complex web of emotions that go with that choice. And we're still in the relatively early days of MAID in terms of the country. Yeah, Bill?
So is there no United Church policy on this? Um, I mean, I know the basic issue is that life is sacred,
Mm-hmm.
and we just should not dismiss it, and we need to respect every other person and their view on how they handle it, and if they wish to end their life early,
Mm-hmm.
then we need to res not put them down or discourage them. However, we need to balance that with life is sacred, yes?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And there is a United Church statement on it. Um, and it's on the United Church Commons. I actually had downloaded it at one point, but didn't. But that could certainly be circulated if that would be helpful for those of you who are, United Church to know. Most of our denominations have put out statements around MAID. The United Church is one that is, sort of again supportive of people making that personal decision and recognizing the sacredness of life, but also, personal autonomy in making a decision. And
Yeah, we
the
would, I mean, my way of summarizing a lot of that is to say that yes, we believe in the sacredness and the importance of life, but not life at any cost. That
right,
there are indeed times in life when the cost of life becomes more than that which honors life. And so, um, opposed certainly to maid being compelled on people, certainly insisting that it's the job of society to provide as many um, caring options as possible, quality pain medication care for those and so on. But ultimately, that God in love does not condemn those who choose this route, just as if we were conducting a funeral for somebody who has chosen to end their life by suicide. God is in that place of pain and loss and confusion. And at some point, somebody said to themselves, everyone would be better if I wasn't here. And
mm,
where is, like, that the pain of that partially comes back to all of the community, but that God does not condemn them. And so, recognizing that black and white blanket statements are problematic even as we honor the sacredness of life and all of the complexity of decision making. So, yeah,
yeah.
we'll try and find that statement and circulate it.
Yeah, it was done in May 6th and 7th, 2017. Medical Assistance in Dying, Theology and Interchurch Interfaith Committee.
Okay.
I knew I had downloaded it. I just didn't have a lot of time to look at it. But it very much recognizes the conclusion says the issue of medical assistance in dying is one that needs ongoing reflection and dialogue in communities of faith. It may be chosen as a faithful option in certain circumstances. At the same time, there are many challenges that have emerged since this option became available, challenges both spiritual and practical. While the right of terminally ill patients under the legislation needs to be honored, affirmation of this legislation must be accompanied by protection and care of the most vulnerable in our society and by universal equal access to palliative care. It must recognize and respect the challenge medical assistance in dying can pose for healthcare professionals. It must also be accompanied by an affirmation of the dignity and intrinsic worth of every life in relation to community. That's the that's the conclusion of it. So, and I don't think there's been anything since 2017.
Mhm. There was discussion at the General Council this summer, which it was a funny sort of conversation because it was saying that pastoral care should be provided for those who opt for MAID under new possibilities that are being talked about those with mental health issues and so on. And the gist of the proposal was that we had to continue to provide pastoral care to people in those situations. And everybody at the General Council sort of said, duh, yeah,
Yeah, of course.
why are we talking about this? And I always wonder what's behind that. And is there a fear that somehow we won't be? But again,
Mm,
we come back to we continue to have the robust discussion in in community and church about the appropriateness and when it's appropriate. And then on the other hand, we have our role as pastoral caregivers in supporting those who have opted for a choice.
yeah,
That's difficult. So, yeah.
yeah. Yeah,
Um,
and to kind of go back to the title of the book that I quoted earlier in the May I Walk You Home, it's still that process of walking people home. It's just that with MAID, there's a definite date where, that's gonna unfold. And for some family members, that's really helpful. Um, so yeah. Other
So,
comments?
something you said earlier, Susan, that struck, made me think was you talked about how some relatives might think that MAID is, a cardinal sin,
Hmm.
and that you know, you're going straight to hell. No, don't pass go, don't collect $200. Um, and I'm but there's if you're providing some sort of pastoral care, you really are providing pastoral care to the whole family, not just
Hmm.
to the individual that is dying or is sick. And I kind of feel like I have to take the side of the person that is 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 dying, but maybe the right choice is not to say anything at all. I kind of feel that almost the need to try and defend them or protect them from those uh, those negative reactions too.
Hmm. Yeah, and there's nothing wrong, Michael, with, having conversations with people to help them explore what's going on for them. So, you always have to ask the question, who is the center of this particular pastoral encounter, right? Is it and most often it is the person who is dying or the person who has chosen MAID. There may be times when you need to have conversations outside of that room with other people, right? So your role is not to be kind of the umpire between family members, but you may need to provide pastoral opportunities for people individually as they come to terms with what's happening, right? Because it's all about them. It's not about you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
can I shift gears just a little bit and invite you, Susan, to talk a little bit about how congregations, and this comes out of your funeral ministry experience in
Mhm.
Cole Harbor, how congregations can help people prepare for that inevitable event because none of us are getting out of this alive.
Right.
And what are some of the things that we can help our congregations do to help folk deal with that? Because both you and I have seen the mess that can exist when people haven't prepared.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I think Cole Harbor Woodside was probably the first congregation in HRM that really began to take funeral ministry seriously, and began that work a lot of years ago now. Since then, congregations like Woodlawn have picked it up, and other congregations. But we began it with a sense that funerals were the rightful business of the church, if you want to put it that way, and that we had a role to play in helping people prepare for their funerals, recognizing that the funeral industry is an industry, it is big business, and people are often caught unawares at the time of a death and end up in a situation that is anything but helpful for them financially and otherwise. So we began the conversation to say, come and let's have some funeral pre-planning. Let's actually invite people into the conversation about what do you want to have happen when you die. And so we just began to do that in the congregation and invite people. We would do afternoon sessions or evening sessions that just said, let's come and talk about it. None of us get out of this life alive. And we created some practical material for people to consider. We created templates for funeral services to say, let's think about it. Do you want to have a funeral at the church, or a celebration of life? If you do, what are your thoughts around that? Do you have favorite passages of scripture or hymns? Are there things you would like said or done or not said or done? And especially recognizing that within the world of church, lots of people who attend church have family who don't, right? Like that's the reality. And so if you, and this is what I would, if you die, will your children have any idea what you would like them to do? And the, overwhelming answer was no. My children, my kids wouldn't have a clue. And so we framed it regularly as this is one of the best gifts you can give your family is to stop and think about this now. And so, from a practical perspective, we had people do those things, and we asked them to give us a copy of what they wanted and for them to keep a copy. And so in our church office, there's a book of funeral plans, service plans that people have made that's in the church office. And I can't tell you how many times family members have said, "Oh my God, this is such a gift. I wouldn't have known what mom wanted, and yet mom had it all written out. These are the hymns, these are the readings, this is what I want." And yeah. And so if you haven't done that for your own family, I would encourage you to do that. The other piece that Cole Harbor did was to recognize that, our people were spending a tremendous amount of money at Atlantic Funeral Homes and Memorial Gardens. They were spending a ton of money that they didn't need to spend. And so again, we developed a funeral ministry team. We encouraged people to opt for direct cremation, which was significantly cheaper, and then hold visitation and the funeral and the reception and everything at the church. And to then make a donation to the church in recognition of the value of that ministry so that the church's ministry could continue. Those donations you get a tax receipt for, so it's win-win all over the place. And we just engaged people in really good conversation about that. And that funeral ministry continues
Yeah.
thrive. I don't know that thrive is the right word when you're talking about funerals, but there is a reality that funerals are the rightful business of the church. And so if you have the capacity of a congregation with people who feel called into that ministry, and I know, Gail was very involved when she was in Cole Harbor in that ministry. I know she's involved with it at Woodlawn. It is a powerful pastoral presence that you offer, and a tangible witness to the work of the church. And so, but just getting people to talk about dying is important.
Yeah.
And so,
Say it's a challenge.
pardon me,
I'd say it's a challenge
it is.
to get people to
It's
talk
a
about death.
challenge. It,
Is it's not. A lot of people will shy away from that.
Yep. Absolutely. And yet, where better to have that conversation in terms of church than in the place that proclaims that, in life, in death, in life beyond death, God is with us. We are not alone. Like we proclaim a resurrection. We proclaim to be resurrected people. And so, why is it that death is harbored in such secrecy? Again, there's a movement in the sort of spiritual, not religious area to have what they call death cafes, where people are invited with a facilitator to show up in a local coffee shop and have this conversation. Well, if you can get non-church people to show up in a cafe to have a conversation with a spiritual person about death, why can't we get church people to come together over coffee and talk about death,
yeah.
right? And to talk about the practical aspects of it, right? Like I think we need to be more invitational around that
Yeah.
to really focus.
You
Jerry?
certainly won't reach the place overnight that Cole Harbor Woodside has gotten to. They did not reach it overnight. But if there is a group, whether it's a session or a pastoral care team or whatever, who takes this up and says this needs to be on our agenda, um, you're doing pastoral care work. You're doing it almost, dare I say it, preemptively,
Mm-hmm.
in so many ways. So it does fall into that sort of mandate. And if there are people who are championing it, then it stays on the very busy agenda of so many congregations. And there are lots of resources out there for you to draw on. Jerry, you're muted.
There you
There
go.
There
you
we go.
go.
Yes, Woodlawn certainly did follow Cold Harbor Woodside's process, went out and folks at Cold Harbor Woodside were very gracious in working with some folks at Woodlawn as we began the process early on a number of years ago. And our funeral ministry is very active, very vibrant. We felt strongly that we didn't want to replace the option of a funeral home. That certainly is within the purview of families to make choices and decisions, but felt that by having workshops, which we do on a fairly regular basis, we usually a time or two a year
Mhm.
over the last number of years have invited the congregation, reminded them if they've not been a part of our workshops on how it is that we plan for and what we can do. And we've invited people in. We've invited people in that from the uh, funeral directors, not necessarily um, Atlantic Funeral Homes, but we've had funeral directors that have spoken to us about options and encouraged people that there are options that are less expensive if they wish to go that route, and sort of being facilitators of providing them a list of names, numbers, and resources and places they can go for various options, and the church being one of those, and the church being absolutely, from our perspective, the primary one. We are there to help and walk with those folks through those final days. Also included in our funeral ministry, we talk a little bit as well about caring for the church, after folks are gone, and that there are opportunities for them. The United Church does provide workshops as well on people leaving a legacy gift, but we
Mhm.
also include that as part of the workshop to encourage and remind folks that they've been tremendous supporters of the church all their lives and can do so in their passing as well by
Mhm.
way of providing a gift. So it's taking what Cole Harbor has done and mirroring it in many ways,
Mhm.
but also seeing it as an opportunity to go that next step. And as you said, Susan, making sure that when we do, a file is created and family members are advised that, the church has a copy and I have a copy with my will here at home so that family members are aware that all of the arrangements and plans have been made.
Yeah.
And it's such a relief. Being a part of the funeral ministry of Woodlawn for a number of years now, I can't tell you how many times I've dealt with family members who have said, what a tremendous thing mom did or dad did to go through this process, and it's made it so easy for us.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, Jerry. I mean, the other thing that we encountered quite regularly were people who believed that they had everything already prearranged and thought that they had paid for everything, and they hadn't, because what they had done was dealt with the cemetery. They had purchased something through Memorial Gardens. They had purchased a cemetery plot and maybe an urn and maybe a headstone, and they thought that they had bought everything, but they actually hadn't. And because frankly, the cemeteries aren't always 100% honest with all of that, in my opinion. And the small print gets ignored that says you will still need to deal with a funeral home to deal with, the transportation of your loved one's body and this and that. And what you've actually paid for is in the business called a retort fee, which is the fee you pay to push the button on the crematorium. And so any number of people thought it was all done. And then when we would help them investigate, they discovered that they still needed and were still going to be on the hook for several $1,000s with the funeral home. So, for me, it was a personal crusade, and I will say it that way. That I was so tired of our church people thinking they had bought one thing and getting another, or thinking that they had to pay what were pretty exorbitant fees. And then, we would show up, the funeral would be at Atlantic Gardens, and I was doing it. I made the bulletin. Our choir came and sang. Our women provided the reception. And I was doing the pastoral care before and after, and the funeral home was getting a tremendous amount of money. Where if people opted simply for direct cremation, and let the church do what the church does best, people were saving a lot of money and then being very generous in their donation to support the church. So, but it only works if you have a congregation where you have a committed group of lay people who will take on that funeral ministry, because it cannot be done by the minister themselves. It just can't. It is too big a task, but it's a glorious ministry for the church to live out.
Yeah. And the place to begin that is to normalize the conversations
Around death.
about death and all of the complications associated there too. I mean,
Yeah.
the number of people who we encounter who don't have something as basic as a will.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, there are some people who don't want to buy insurance for fear the moment they buy insurance they're going to die. The moment I write a will, well, that's the end of my life. But Susan and I and others know what happens in families when there has been no will, and the oh my. And yeah. And the number of people who, as Susan said, I have no idea what mom or dad would want. I mean, I just don't know. And so to have those conversations, and in my experience anyway, in many parts of the country, funeral professionals, whether and lawyers and estate people and so on, are quite delighted to come and do workshops and not be recruiting clientele.
Right.
They're
Yep.
they because they too have cleaned up the pieces after um, unprepared deaths. And
Yeah.
as we said before, nobody's getting out of this alive, so we may as well make some provision, some plan. And we did a similar thing in churches that I've been part of, not nearly as elaborate as Cole Harbor or as Woodlawn, but just the education and the provision of documents and all the rest of it. So
Yeah. It's really important work.
really important. Are there any, as we come to the end of this
Wow.
session, are there
Another two
any
hours gone.
Another 2 hours gone. Are there any other questions for Susan? Well, I do want to let people know our next session in October, our next module is Dr. David Dean. And this is going to be a rarer opportunity for in a couple of reasons. One is that David is leaving Atlantic School of Theology to go to Newman College somewhere out west.
Edmonton.
Edmonton. Okay,
Yeah.
yeah.
Going
He,
for a
we,
couple
were,
of years.
we were having conversations about temperatures earlier in the month. Anyway, but David is a Roman Catholic theologian, very much involved in the education and the empowerment of laity, and is going to be speaking to us about the importance of what we sometimes call the dusty topic of doctrine, but it's not dusty. It undergirds what we claim to believe as disciples of Jesus. So he's going to be helping us to move into that treasury of the church's thinking about the big issues and how the church's thinking can be accessible to the whole of the body of Christ. And he does so with passion and exuberance and it will.
Wit.
Sorry?
Wit. His
And wit.
Irish wit is
Yes,
amazing.
I've never known anybody who can make doctrine as humorous as David manages to. It's quite entertaining, and so
Yes.
I really do encourage you to make point of being there. And as we get into this rhythm more, you will be receiving in the next week from me some background material from David, maybe some focus questions. And if you have a question about for David, maybe there's a particular Christian doctrine that has always baffled you, or maybe whatever it is, please send it to me and I'll be delighted to forward it to him. And I know he'll be delighted to receive it because he's very good at responding in a very concrete way. To give you another a part of David's role, he's been highly involved in what is known in Roman Catholic circles as the diploma in the new evangelization, which is about Roman Catholic lay discipleship. And so he's got lots of experience in opening up the mysteries of the faith to those who make no claim to any sort of theological education. So he's a rich resource, and I was
He
so
is.
delighted that he said yes to this fall before he disappeared to other places. So,
Absolutely. He's
so
amazing.
that's coming up. Susan, thank you.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you in the midst of your busy schedule, and thank you in a particularly tender time in your ongoing journey of sharing yourself and your wisdom and your passion, and deeply appreciate it. And
Good.
wish you all sorts of blessings in the journey. And I don't think what she hasn't told us all is that part of her family has moved closer to home. So the grandchildren are now this side of the border. And so she goes around the school wearing this great big smile. So we're
Happy
delighted.
day.
It is happy days. I actually got to go to New Minas yesterday and babysit my two grandchildren so their mom could have a night away with a friend at a concert. So this morning was the first time that I got to do breakfast and get two little ones out the door for school with their lunches packed. I'm exhausted. I'm going to bed very shortly after this ends.
Sleep well. And
Thank you.
blessings,
Thank you
folks, in
all.
your journey, and thanks for being part of this evening. And we will be circulating the connection to the video so you can review or remind. We'll be doing that very shortly.
Okay. Thanks, folks. Blessings.
Thank you, Susan.
All
Susan,
Thank
right.
thank
you.
you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Susan.
You're welcome.
Good night, all.
Good night.
Right.